everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the webinar titled Oracle Clinical and Remote Data Capture Implementation Standards and Best Practices, presented by Lori Venable from BioPharm Systems. I'm Eugene Safanov, the Marketing Manager at BioPharm, and I will be going over some housekeeping items before I turn it over to Lori. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. However, you may submit questions to the speaker at any time today by typing them in the chat feature located on the left side of your screen. Please note that other webinar participants will not see your questions or comments. Nonetheless, your questions will be addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar, or would like to request information from BioPharm, feel free to visit biopharm.com for contact information. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on BioPharm's website within 24 hours. We will also be emailing you a link to the recording. This concludes our housekeeping items. I would like to now turn the call over to Lori Venable.
Hello, everybody. Some of you may know me. Some of you may be clients of ours. Maybe I've done some training classes or helped you with your pilot studies or writing your SOPs or things like that. Or you might know me from OSUG, where I've been quite visible since 1996 when it started. So anyway, welcome. I understand we have a pretty large attendance for this webinar today, which I hope is good. So I hope that everybody, even if some of this stuff might be repetition, I hope that everybody at least takes away, walks away from this having learned something new. So let's go ahead and get started here. This is, of course, the title of the presentation. I guess you're all aware of that. This is me. Just to give a little bit of background, this presentation is based on my experience and my expertise in the industry. I've been in the industry for over 23 years. And yeah, I know what you're all thinking. She looks so young. And you're right, I started when I was 8 years old. So there you go. I've worked in a variety of companies, large pharma companies. I worked in small pharma, small device company, contract company. Now I'm in the consulting side of things. I have been using Oracle Clinical since its very first release about 16.5 years ago. So I was one of the very first users there. And of course, remote data capture when it first came out, which I think has been about 8 or 9 years now. So I've worked in a variety of capacities, and now on the consulting side of things, I've been with BioPharm for about 8 years. So again, having been exposed to a lot more types of companies and helping people define their standards and figure out, okay, now we've bought this beast called Oracle Clinical and RDC, now what are we going to do with it? So I recognize that the needs of every organization varies quite a bit. So no two companies are alike, but I've really found that these particular approaches and philosophies that I'm going to be talking about today really work across all kinds of companies, no matter what size your company is or what kind of things you do. It might not necessarily be a one-size-fits-all, but we can take some of these messages and make some alterations as you see fit and basically make it so that it's suitable for your organization. Whoops, I used the wrong button. Did it go to the next slide? Okay. So here's our agenda for today, some of the things we're going to talk about. I'm hoping that we'll have plenty of time, 10 or 15 minutes at the end for questions and answers. So as Eugene said, put your questions in that chat area, and hopefully we'll have time to address them at the end. Talking about the kind of the who, what, and why. Who is the intended audience for this? Some of you are probably not even OC or RDC users yet. Maybe you're evaluating the applications, planning on purchasing them. Maybe you're just not there yet. Whoops, I'm sorry, it went too far ahead. Some of you might be new to OC and RDC. Maybe you've been using OC for a while and now are just starting with RDC. But regardless, maybe you're in that phase now where you're starting to define your implementation standards, your SOPs, your work instructions. You're kind of at that phase. Or some of you might be long-time users, and maybe you're contemplating an upgrade to a newer version, or maybe you're contemplating making some modifications to your existing business practices and want to make some changes, or I'm not sure why it keeps switching slides. There we go. So hopefully, again, everybody will have some sort of take-home from this presentation. Now we're going to talk what is a best practice. So here I have 3 different definitions of a best practice from 3 different sources. As you can see, even though they're all stated just a slightly different, all 3 of the definitions basically indicate that a best practice is a proven method of performing some task or function that results in a consistent, effective, and superior result. So obviously these attributes are all things that we want to achieve on a daily basis when we're managing our clinical studies. The end result of consistent use of best practices is increases in efficiency, increases in quality, productivity, and that in turn results in savings in time and money. So we're going to focus on some of these best practices as we move forward in Oracle Clinical and RDC. The why are standards important? In order to really capitalize on the functionality within RDC and OC, I think standards are critical. The more that you can standardize, the better the system is really going to work for you. It's going to minimize study setup time immensely. So based on our previous definitions on the previous slide of best practices, it's clear that standardization and consistency are key components to meeting that objective of best practices. OC and RDC are very robust, very flexible. It's a very flexible system. There's a lot of features, a lot of functionality, but you as an organization have to make decisions about if and how you're going to use certain features, if and how you're going to use certain functionalities to make it work best for you. So how you decide to make those decisions, what you're going to use and how you're going to use it, that's really going to dictate the level of success that you're going to have in terms of increases in efficiency, increase in time savings, increase in quality, productivity, as well as your increase in training new users as they come aboard, as they join your organization. It's going to increase all of those things the more that you can standardize. And again, this again translates into a decrease in the time and money spent. Some of the common themes you're going to hear throughout this presentation, regardless of the topic that we're talking about, whether we're talking about training or SOPs and wins or your implementation standards, some of the common themes are, first of all, teamwork. Everything has to happen as part of a team. Part of teamwork is the right level of inclusion throughout every step and stage of the process. Nothing should be just one small little group of 2 or 3 people or just the management folks or things like that. You have to have the right level of inclusion of all of the people who are really going to be impacted and affected by everything. There's this cross-functional partnership. You really need to recognize that every functional representative on a team brings a unique set of experiences, a unique skill set, knowledge, expertise, as well as their needs. So you have to be able to recognize what everybody brings to the table and what their needs are, what their requirements are. Recognize the contributions and needs of all of the team members. Don't discount anybody and the possible contributions that they might bring to a team. Sometimes it's very easy for us to minimize the importance of certain roles or certain functions within a team because we think, oh, they're pretty low on the totem pole. What they have to say or what they think really doesn't matter. But it's a real mistake to discount the contributions of anybody. And this team consists of everybody from your medical or clinical personnel to CRAs, statisticians, data managers, data entry people, programmers, data coders, lab personnel, site personnel, your CRF designers, study developers. The list just goes on and on, depending on how your organization is defined. Communication, of course, is very important. Sometimes the communication is primarily through electronic email or things like that. But again, the right level of inclusion is very important. Meetings, making sure the right people are in attendance or at least aware of the meetings and have all that communication back and forth. You need buy-in from all team members. Again, this kind of goes back to don't discount anything that anybody brings to the table, what their needs are, what their requests are, what their questions are. Active participation. Everybody has to take their own accountability for this, so everybody has to participate actively. They can't just say, oh, I don't need to be involved in these first 4 or 5 meetings. I'll wait till the very end till we're ready to sign everything off, and then I'll join. At that point, it's just too late. You have to be accountable for your own active participation of sharing your ideas, sharing your requirements, your recommendations, your feedback. Are there global needs? This depends on your organization. Some companies that are international don't discount, again, your locations that might be on the other side of the pond or on the other side of the country or something like that. Don't just think that you and your small little group are the only ones involved. Or are there other therapy areas? Are there other business units that also need to be part of this team? So keep all of those things in mind as you're moving forward. The bottom line is when you have the appropriate level of teamwork, the benefits and the payoffs for that proper level of team involvement and inclusion are phenomenal. It's a real win-win when the right people are involved and everybody does their part. The project benefits, the team benefits, the individuals benefit, and in the end result, the best practices that you're going to come up with are really going to be the best of the best. Next, some other common themes. In addition to teamwork, standards. You're going to hear me say standards, standards, standards a lot. I think sometimes I probably say that word in my sleep. But this, again, is going to increase the speed and the ease of use for your OC implementation. It increases efficiency and productivity so that the more that you can standardize, you have the reusability of OC objects, the more that you can standardize. When things are consistent across all users, across all projects, then if a new person has to join your team, if he or she is used to using those same standards on the previous team they were on, it shouldn't be like having to join a whole new company. It also simplifies your training and your coaching when everything is standardized and consistent. Process improvement, again, this is a big common theme across all of these topics we'll be talking about. I think process improvement needs to be continuous and ongoing, always looking for ways to improve and make things better. Maintain things, FAQs, frequently asked questions. Think about things like that. If there's patterns that evolve from, everybody asks this same question during this training class, or everybody asks this exact same question about this SOP or this work instruction. Well, maybe that means there's a gap there and it isn't addressed the way it should be. So that's a way to improve your process and learn. I'm a big advocate of doing what I call a debriefing or a lessons learned after all of your projects, after a study, after a pilot. Get everybody together. Again, this can be very formal, it can be very informal, but do this debriefing and talk about what worked well, what didn't work well, where can we make some improvements. Receptivity, being, again, receptive to everybody's ideas. Everybody on the team should be able to contribute their ideas and their feedback, so nothing is off the table. Don't be afraid to change. Just because maybe you spent the last 6 months working on this one SOP and now it's finally finished and it's finalized, again, if you find some way to improve it, don't be afraid to change it. You're going to learn from things, and I know change can be difficult for some of us, but I think it really needs to be embraced because you should always be looking to make things better. Use your resources. There's a lot of resources out there at your disposal, people within your own organization. New employees, a lot of people are afraid to ask new people. They think, oh, this person's new, they don't know anything, they don't know what we do or how they do it. But it's a good opportunity. Take that opportunity to say, how did you do this at your last company? Or what did you, they bring new and fresh ideas. And again, that sometimes is an excellent way to really be making improvements. You also have a lot of documentation resources. There's user guides available for these applications, user manuals. Some of them are 400 or 500 pages long. You might not want to read it cover to cover, but there's a lot of valuable information there. Online help, the training materials that you have. Also use outside resources. A lot of you are already clients of ours at BioPharm, as maybe we are already your consultants, so you can consult with people like us. I'm a huge advocate of becoming OSUG members. That's the Oracle Health Sciences User Group. If you're not already a member, that's an excellent avenue to ask questions, find out how other people are doing things, why they do things the way they do, participate on those focus groups or the discussion forums on the website. There's a lot of resources available. So now kind of moving on to these topics where we have a lot of these common themes. First, we're going to talk about training. We have first, of course, the training on the applications. You have to be trained on OC, RDC, whatever applications you're using. Formal training, attending the actual formal training classes. BioPharm, of course, we offer training classes at all levels of OC, RDC, from the very basic stuff to very advanced topics. So you have to have that kind of training. Again, here's one of our common themes, the right level of inclusion. Hands-on users versus your one-off users versus management. Hands-on users who are going to be using the application, obviously, they really need to know the functionality, how things work, how to be able to do the tasks that they're going to be doing on a day-to-day basis. So they, they really need to know the how-to part of the applications. Excuse me. The one-off users might be some of your clinical folks, maybe some of your CRAs, maybe some of statisticians, where they might necessarily not be hands-on users within Oracle Clinical, but they still need to know some things about it. They need to know the capabilities, the limitations, what your company standards are, how you do things, so that they know, what can we do, what can we ask for, what are the reasonable expectations that they can make of the people who are the hands-on users. Management, upper management doesn't necessarily need to sit through an entire OC training class and learn how to use it. It's interesting, some of the classes that I've taught, I've gone to a site and, they got the vice president of the company sitting in this class. I'm like, I don't understand that. But, I think those people definitely need to have a pretty high-level overview, again, of the capabilities and the limitations of the system and what you're doing and how, because they need to be able to set some realistic expectations. They can't have an expectation of, okay, yeah, our first study going into Oracle Clinical, we bought this new system, hey, we can have our first study up and running and everything ready to go in less than 2 weeks. Well, no, that's just not realistic. So they need to be aware at a fairly high level what things are so that they can, again, set realistic expectations. Also, in your application training, you have to think about the delivery method. Are you going to have an instructor-led training class, either on-site at your location versus a public training class somewhere else? There's pros and cons to both of those methods. In a public class, you have access to other people from other companies, and you have the benefit of hearing what their questions are and what they're doing and how they're doing it. So there's pros and cons on both sides of that. Maybe you have online web-based training. Again, is this self-initiated? How do you prove that somebody took the training? How, they passed the test? How do you know they learned what they need to know? Is there access to be able to ask a question when somebody's taking a web-based class? Is there a mechanism for asking questions of an online instructor? Hands-on exercises, I think, are very important. It's one thing to watch somebody else in front of a classroom perform the tasks, navigate the system, everything. Oh, yeah, that looks good. Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, yeah, that's pretty easy. But as soon as you're the one that has control of the keyboard and the mouse, all of a sudden it's like, oh, holy mackerel, now what do I do, or where do I go, or how did she get to that menu, what was the drop-down? So it's definitely important, I think, to be able to do those hands-on exercises in whatever way you do the training. Sometimes you have train the trainer type classes. I think this is particularly a good approach for your RDC site training, where you train the trainer. Maybe the CRA is going to be the trainer who's going to train the site personnel for an RDC study. So you're training the CRA on how to be the trainer for the other users. And one of the biggest issues here, I think, is having consistent material. So if you have consistent trainers, consistent people, consistent material that goes to all of the students, everyone receives the same information, the same instruction, regardless of who it came from, so that they know, if they ask a question of person A, they're going to get the same answer as if they ask the exact same question of person B. There's not going to be any disconnect there. Also in the application training, I think just-in-time training is very, very important with something like Oracle Clinical. It's a huge application. There's a lot to learn. Even when you're just taking the basics class, you can't learn it in a week or 2 weeks. I've been using it for over 16 years, and I'm still learning something new every day. So if you get that training too early, don't get your OC training in February if you're not even going to have it installed and validated and available until June or July or August. Going along with that is planning some time to play in the system or practice in a training environment or a test environment, depending on how your system is set up. Maybe not in your production environment. You don't want to be playing around in there, but plan for some of that time to play around, navigate a bit, so that you're become more familiar with it. Pilot studies, I think, are very, very important also. You can use one of your old legacy studies that's done and finished in some legacy system and use that as a pilot, and how would you set that up in OC? Or you can use maybe some new small non-submission study that you have going on. Or in lieu of that, one thing that BioPharm does when we do pilots with clients, we have developed our own pilot study that kind of utilizes a variety of different types of CRFs and different utilizes all the different features and functionality. So it's a pretty good, pretty broad pilot study that people can use. I think that pilots are important in really helping you learn the system above and beyond what you learned in that formal training class, but now you're able to really learn some of the features, the functionality, and start making some decisions and planning how you are going to use the system yourself. So you're kind of planning your standard implementation processes. So that then leads to your helping you define your SOPs and work instructions. Self-education. Again, this is something that I think people need to be accountable for themselves. Everybody should be accountable for some of this. Read those user guides or sections of the user guides. You might not want to sit down and read the admin guide unless you're having trouble with insomnia or something. But take advantage of that information that's out there. There's lots of resources. Again, go to the OSUG website, participate on those focus groups. Read some of the documents out there, read some of the discussion threads out there where people have shared ideas and asked questions and gotten responses. There's also several LinkedIn groups. If you're part of LinkedIn, there's a group for Oracle Clinical users. There's a group for RDC users. There's all kinds of LinkedIn groups out there as well. And, of course, put a little plug in there for BioPharm. Our consultants, too, are available to educate and help people throughout this whole process. Again, to reiterate, learn from your mistakes. Bottom line, you're going to make them. That's one thing I think the training process and the pilot process is all about, learning from your mistakes. Make mistakes, almost embrace your mistakes, and then do a debriefing or a lessons learned afterwards so that you can say, here's what we did wrong. Oh, here's what we didn't do. Here's what we could do better. Here, yeah, this worked okay, but we could make it even better. So really embrace that as a learning opportunity. In addition to the application training, you, of course, have to have then your training on your processes. So this is going to start with a very thorough assessment of what your current processes are, your current SOPs and wins and business practices. So what do you currently have? Assess all of that. And then also assess what your future needs are. Think short-term and long-term. Also consider those projects or those studies that might fall in the middle of this transition period. Let's face it, none of us are just going to totally shut down all of our studies and everything that's going on for the next 6 months while we get our training and define our SOPs and define our wins. And studies keep coming and new things keep happening. So plan for those projects that are taking place during this transition period, and you're probably going to have to document some. This study is deviating from these SOPs. Here's how it's deviating. Here's why it's deviating. We're in the process of defining new SOPs, things like that. So obviously have to document those kind of things. Again, just like your application training, training on your processes have both formal and informal training. So formal training classes on your business processes, your SOPs. Most companies have requirements that before people are allowed to really do anything in the system, they've been trained on the SOPs, they've been trained on the processes, they have to pass a test, they have a certificate, whatever the case may be in your organization, but make sure that you've gotten that training. The informal, again, can happen through these methods of assessing your needs, assessing what's currently happening and what you need to have happen in the future. Informal meetings or formal meetings, review cycles, emails, things like that. It also includes, of course, as I mentioned, your formal training on your SOPs and your work instructions. And again, here's that common theme of process improvement. So constantly be assessing ways to keep making things better and how you can improve as you go. Other training considerations. I'm a big advocate of what I call cross-functional training. Not really training in that you need to learn how everybody else does their job, but I think this is really important for building an understanding about the tasks that the other functions perform, what their needs are, what their expectations are. So you might be a data manager, but I think it's very important for you to understand functionally the CRA role. You might just think you know what they do, but this will help you understand at a very high level what they do, what they need, why they need it, why they do what they do, why they ask you for some of the things they ask you for. It kind of helps fit all of the different pieces of the puzzle together. So one of the places I worked in the past, we kind of did these lunch and learns where we could say, okay, here, let's teach everybody else who's in the clinical department what data managers really do, kind of what we do, how we do it, why we do it, because a lot of people just have this perception that data managers enter data and then they push the magic button that they have on their keyboard that says spit out clean data and it's done. So just to have a broader understanding of what people do, how they do it, why they do it, so you can understand why they're asking. They might be asking you for something that to you makes no sense at all. Why do they need this? Why are they asking for it? That just seems very unreasonable. But if you understand a little bit more, this cross-functional education and understanding of what they do, I'm sorry, it skipped ahead, then it'll again help the team, everybody kind of meet the objectives of the entire team. Training always should be ongoing. You're always learning things new, continuing your assessments of training. Where are there gaps? Again, where are there patterns? Where are there things where people keep asking these same questions? So maybe we're not covering that thoroughly enough in our training. What's working? What's not working? Again, that whole idea of process improvements. Retraining is obviously going to be necessary on a periodic basis. So if you haven't performed a certain task in several months, maybe this is the person who does batch loads and you only do batch data loads once every 6 months, you're going to forget from one time to the next how you do that unless it's a task that you do on a pretty regular basis. As there's new applications or new upgrades, new releases, new functionality, there's going to have to be some retraining. So be prepared for that, plan for that. And then, of course, the certification, proof of training. Most companies, I think, require some sort of a test. And you have to pass 80% of this test to be able to, prove that you took this training and you know what you're doing, and okay, now we can give you a user account or whatever. So make sure that you're compliant with whatever your company's requirements are on that regard. Now moving on to user roles and functions. People oftentimes think of the user roles or the functional roles as the job title. It goes way beyond the job title in OC. There's dozens of functional roles that are necessary for OC and RDC. So you really need to clearly outline all of those needed roles and functions. So have this list. There's a global librarian, there's a study developer, there's a procedure developer, there's a study designer, there's somebody who sets up and maintains the lab reference ranges subsystem, there's somebody who does batch data loads, there's somebody who does discrepancy. The list, like I said, you could come up with dozens. In most companies, you have one person that fulfills multiple of those roles. Okay, so maybe your data manager is also the person who does your study development. Maybe your global librarian is also the person who maintains the lab ranges subsystem. So you can have more than one person filling more than one of these functional roles or wearing multiple hats. That's okay. I think, in fact, that's preferable, because then you have a lot of shared expertise across the organization. Think about your current resource availability. Is it sufficient? Are the people that you have on staff now sufficiently trained for the roles that you expect them to fulfill? Do they need additional training? Do you need to hire additional people? Think about that, what your current resources are. Company size makes a difference. A lot of times you have a large company. One company I worked for, we had the luxury of a huge company. We had 5 or 6 people who all they did was create global library objects. That was all they did. Smaller companies, you don't have that luxury. You have, the person who's the global librarian is also wearing 4, 5, 6 other hats. So you have to think about your company size in addition to the resources. Looking at internal versus external resources. A lot of people use CROs for some of their study activities, the study conduct. Maybe the CRA activities are contracted out. Also using consultants. This is a place where we at BioPharm come in a lot. We do a lot of study setup for companies. We do a lot of helping people set up their SOPs and their wins and their best practices. We do a lot of these activities, program validation procedures, things like that. Not because maybe you don't have the expertise within your organization, but you just don't have enough people or enough time. So consider using external consultants for things like that. User account creation and maintenance. How is that maintained? Is that by your IT group? You have to have input for the people who are involved in OC and RDC to how that's going to work, who's going to be responsible for that, what the prerequisites are. Obviously, you need to have proof of the appropriate training before you should be given a user account and the privileges. Of all of these different functional roles we've talked about, you've got this whole list of functional roles, which accesses and which privileges are assigned for each one of these roles. So clearly identify those things. You also have what's called the user groups within Oracle Clinical. So what are those different accesses and privileges for each user group, for each user account, all of those things. So those are things that really need to be outlined and thought about. And again, we talked about some of the other consideration, the frequency of tasks. If there's certain things that aren't done really frequently, you might have to think about Is there retraining necessary? Make sure there's checklists or some quick reference cards or things like that to allow for refreshers for people who don't do some of those tasks on a very frequent basis. Now we're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic, SOPs. Always a favorite topic. Whoops, I'm not sure why this keeps skipping ahead. So looking at this yellow box here, you say, okay, SOPs associated with OC and RDC are typically include information about the setup and the use of the applications in conjunction with your day-to-day collection and management of clinical trial data. Okay, so that in a nutshell is what we're talking about. The SOPs, in my opinion, best practices are that SOPs should be very high level. There really shouldn't be much detail in them at all. Okay, they're a high-level overview of the what we do. Okay, so they don't get into the details and the nitty-gritty, but pretty high level. You don't want to have to update your SOPs every time you get a new release or there's a new version of OC, because those happen frequently. You don't want to have to update your SOPs every quarter or something like that. I think SOPs should start to be drafted during the stages where you're doing the training and your pilot studies, because this is where you're really becoming aware of the functionality, what features and functionality you might be using. You're having those discussions, making some of those decisions about what your best practices are going to be. I don't recommend finalizing SOPs until after your pilot studies are done, sometimes maybe not even until after your first or second live production studies are done. I'm aware that there's been some companies out there that want their SOPs written, done, and final before they've ever even installed Oracle Clinical or had the training or validated it or anything. And that shocked me, because I thought, you don't even know how you want to use this system yet, and yet you want to have SOPs finalized before you've even had the training. To me, I think that's a huge mistake, because you're basically setting yourself up for having to update your SOPs almost immediately. But these are my recommendations. Again, the right level of inclusion. Think about everybody that's going to be impacted by these various SOPs and make sure that they are part of the discussions, part of the decisions, part of the review cycles. Again, everybody's input should be valued. The training on your SOPs should be just as important as training on the system, so that everybody knows what's expected of them. It also should be part of your onboarding for new employees or new people that come into a project, both your internal employees and external resources that you might be using. In my experience, my recommendation is that you would generally have somewhere between 6 and 12 SOPs just for OC and RDC. Kind of have a list of those that I usually recommend, but it again varies from organization to organization. Also in your SOPs, again, you're going to review and assess what your current SOPs and business processes are. Identify any gaps that might exist. Do a lot of requirements gathering. Identify things that might be obsolete now that you're moving to a new system. So some of your things, okay, well, we're not going to do this anymore, so this isn't really going to be relevant. Identify your current and future needs going forward, things that might be absent from what's in your current SOPs and process documents. You really need to consider other departments. Are there existing SOPs written in some other department that are going to impact yours? Clinical, the safety group, IT, a coding group, labs group. Are there other departments, other groups where their SOPs might overlap with yours? You want to make sure that there's buy-in, that you've reviewed theirs. Maybe an IT department is the one who's responsible for all account creation and maintenance for all systems throughout your organization. Well, you have to make sure that you read and follow their SOP on this and are aware of how they create and maintain accounts, and you should probably have some input on how that is done for OC and RDC account creation and maintenance. So are there any overlaps? Make sure there's no gaps. Make sure there's no inconsistencies or heaven forbid, contradictions. If two SOPs across two different departments are contradictory with each other, you're setting yourself up for a nightmare there. And that goes both ways. Are there other departments that your SOPs are going to impact? So again, make sure that they have buy-in, that they are included in that requirements gathering, that they're included in review cycles, and you get their feedback as well. So making sure that they're going to be expected to be trained on and to be compliant with the SOPs that you're creating too. Remember, SOPs are always subject to audit. So I always recommend not referencing other documents in your SOPs. Don't reference your wins in the SOPs. Don't reference your training materials. Don't reference other process documents or checklists or things like that. As soon as you mention it in an SOP, then it also becomes auditable. So I, again, keep those SOPs pretty high level without the detail. Ideally, SOPs would be finalized before you actually go live. In reality, I don't really think that's very realistic. Usually they're not quite ready, and I think that's okay as long as you document where things in a current project or a current study are deviating from your SOPs and why, and as long as you document all those things, you should be okay. Now we're going to talk about work instructions, what I call WINs. Some people call these business process documents, things like this. I've just gotten used to the word WINs, so that's what I call them. These supplement your SOPs, and they're what provides the detailed step-by-step how to perform a particular task or function in OC or RDC. Many of the things I'm going to say about WINs are the same as SOPs, so I'm not going to repeat those things. I'll just outline the things that are a little bit different. They're the more detailed. Again, they're the step-by-step how-to. Okay, so the SOPs are a very high level what we do. The WINs are the detailed how we do it. WINs, I think, should be developed concurrently with your SOPs, kind of at the same time. The level of inclusion, the training, all of that, same as the SOPs. And as a general rule, I think each SOP should have at least one supplemental WIN. Most cases, what I've seen, there's anywhere from 1 to 7 or 8 WINs per SOP, and the WINs are usually lengthier, they're meatier. Again, they have that detailed how-to step-by-step information. Again, they supplement the SOPs. They also supplement your training so that when you have new people come on board, this includes the step-by-step how they should be doing things. Similar to your SOPs, you're going to review and assess what you currently have and identify the gaps, identify the requirements. The same thing with the other departments, same as with the SOPs, making sure that you have buy-in from other departments where your SOPs and WINs might impact other departments, or other departments' SOPs and WINs might impact you. Okay, don't have overlaps or gaps or any inconsistencies across those departments. It's very important. WINs are not subject to audit, again, unless you reference them in your SOPs. If in your SOP you say, see WIN number XYZ for the details, then it becomes auditable. So you don't want to do that. You can freely reference other documents and other sources in your WINs. Reference training materials, reference the user guides, process documents, quick reference guides, checklists, that sort of thing. Oftentimes you have attachments are very common to have with your WINs, a checklist, a quick reference guide, a quick how-to. Here's just this little card I print out that this is kind of the bulk of my WIN. They're generally less formal than SOPs, so you still need the same level of inclusions from the team and making decisions and everything. So again, no decisions should be made in a vacuum. You should still have those review cycles, gather feedback, approval, finalization, but it shouldn't require the same level of high-level approval and sign-off as your SOPs. So again, they're much easier then to update and modify as necessary. Because your wins are going to be more detailed, you're probably going to need to modify them, at least reassess them, and perhaps modify them every time there's a new version or an upgrade to a new release, depending on if your processes change due to that. And also when you revisit decisions about how you're going to use certain features or functionality, it'll be easier to update that win than the SOPs. Again, just like the SOPs, ideally these would be finalized before you go live, but in reality, I don't think that usually happens. They're usually still kind of in that development stage, and again, I think that's okay and that's more realistic. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about implementation and usage standards. Again, this covers a lot of what we've already talked about, the SOPs and the wins. So again, I said this before, OC and RDC are very robust, very flexible, but how your company makes these decisions about what features and functionality you're going to use and how, that's really going to dictate the level of success that you have in terms of increases in efficiency, quality, speed, consistency, all of those things, and obviously the decrease then in time and money. I'm a huge advocate of the 80-20 rule. In this regard, I consider the 80-20 rule, if 80% of what you do and what you collect is standardized, you really only need to spend 20% of your time on that part of it. Standardized everything from your protocol verbiage to standard CRF, standard edit checks, cross-study consistency, the data processing, things like that. If all of that can be standardized for your adverse events, your demography, medical history, physical exam, vitals, all of those things, if all of that can be standardized, you really spend minimal time on those aspects for each study. And then the 20% that's new and different and unique in your particular project, that's where you can spend 80% of your time and effort, because that's the stuff that is new, it's different for a reason, because your protocol is asking a new or unique question. So it warrants the majority of your time and effort on that. So that's where I'm kind of an advocate of all of that 80-20 rule, both in the things that you collect as well as in your standards. While I'm a huge advocate of standards, standards, you always have to recognize the need for flexibility, okay? It's always very legitimate to say, okay, I know this is our standard demography form, but for my study I have to ask one additional question. I have to ask this question about smoking status or smoking history. So you have to make sure, it's reasonable, it's realistic to have those one-off questions now and then, and you're going to have these periodic deviations, and that's okay. Sometimes I think it's important then that you communicate the cost of that deviation. If somebody wants to change the entire form, here's what that's going to cost you. It's going to take a lot more time to build the study. It's going to take a lot more edit checks. It's going to take a lot more this and that, time, effort, everything. So kind of communicate the costs. And then also sometimes you just need to push back and be ready to challenge some of those requests, with the, is this really, really necessary, or is this just a nice to have? If you're asking for it just to ask for it, it's not a good enough reason. Also, the maintenance of your standards, everything, all of the things that you standardize, your CRFs, your Oracle clinical objects, your data management plan, SOPs, WINs, training materials, your business processes, all of these other resources and tools, everybody has to take responsibility and ownership for the maintenance of this stuff, adhering to these standards, compliance with your standards, and yet also at the same time everybody should feel responsible and comfortable asking questions, raising challenges. If something doesn't seem like it's right, it could be better, nothing should be off limits. Again, you shouldn't reprimand or criticize anybody who wants to challenge the way you're currently doing things. So everybody should have that treat everybody else with dignity and respect. And again, here we are back to the process improvement. Change is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. You've got to be open to it, embrace it. And the whole, think outside of the box. Sometimes the best ideas and suggestions might come from a very unlikely source. Sometimes I'll be chatting with my husband over dinner about something. I'm like, this just isn't working for me. I can't figure this out. There's got to be a better way to do this. And he might not even have a clue the whole issue I'm talking about, but he might just say, well, have you ever thought about this? So sometimes it's that aha moment. You're kind of looking at it too close. You don't see the forest for the trees. So sometimes those fresh new ideas come from a very unlikely source. And again, use those external sources that are available to you as well. So in summary, here again, I'm kind of reiterating some of the common themes I talked about earlier, just kind of summarizing them all. I don't need to read through this all again. I think you've heard it all. But again, those are my suggestions, my recommendations based on my years of experience and helping other companies. And as soon as I say, gosh, I've seen it all of a sudden I see something with, holy mackerel, they want to do what? Like, there's just no way, but we figure out a way. So there's almost always a way to make something work for you. So with that, we'll open it up to questions. I'll pass it back to Eugene. I think he's been keeping track of any questions that you might have put in the chat area. So Eugene?
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lori. So it looks like we actually don't have any questions at the moment. So I'll give you another 2 minutes if you have any questions about OCRDC, about the various topics that Lori's discussed. Feel free to ask it via the chat feature on the bottom left-hand side. So we'll give it another minute to see if we have any questions. Okay, one question is, what versions of OCRDC do you see with your current customers?
We currently have some customers that are, believe it or not, still back in version 4.03. I'm kind of embarrassed. I guess I shouldn't be embarrassed. Maybe they should. Most of our current customers are in one of the 4.5 versions. We have some that are in 4.5.1, 4.5.2, 4.5.3. We have quite a few that have upgraded now to 4.6.0. We have some now that are purchasing, just ready to install 4.6.4, which just came out. I finalized the 4.6.4 validation suites just, well, actually in December. I executed it on our system last month. So it kind of runs the gamut. Most of them are in one of the 4.5 .x releases, but a lot are moving into the 4.6 releases.
Great. Next question is, how do you keep the validation effort under control in view of so many OC upgrades?
Oh, the question of the hour. What I recommend, and one thing that we do, is kind of a risk-based approach. We will take a look at, or I think customers should take a look at what features and functionality they currently use. Look at the release notes on a new release, what's in there, what bug fixes, what new features, new functionality, and kind of do a risk-based approach of whether or not that's a feature or functionality that they would use, whether or not they need to validate it. Sometimes just when you do a new installation, it might be sufficient to just execute the smoke tests, and that's enough, or re-execute just certain validation test cases to make sure. Sometimes in the process, let's face it, I've been through, well, I started on version 2.15, which was the very, very first version they released 16 years ago. Every time they fix something, they very often break something else. So you might want to just make sure that, okay, while they made this change in the validation procedures functionality, did they break anything else? So you might want to just do executing smoke tests will sometimes tell you that. Just, okay, the validation procedures or batch validation still runs the way it always ran, as expected. Nothing got broken in the process. So I usually recommend a kind of a risk assessment approach to that.
Great, thank you. What is the latest version of OC RDC at the moment?
464.
Perfect.
464
sorry, go ahead.
Out in March.
Okay. How have the best practices been evolving in the last 5 years?
Wow. Best practices for OC, there hasn't been a whole lot of new features and functionality on the OC side of things, but a lot has changed on the RDC side of things. I think a lot of that has really come from, again, I'm going to put in a plug for the OSUG, OHSUZ, Oracle Health Sciences User Group. A lot of the requests for enhancements and changes come from that group, because they'll say, yeah, it's well and good that you can set privileges so that users only have access to certain sites or certain features or certain privileges that they can perform, but hey, we want to restrict it all the way down to the CRF level. We want this site to be able to see all of the CRFs except for the lab CRF, because that might potentially unblind them. So a lot of those things originate from that group. When certain features and functionalities don't exist, companies then have to kind of create their own workarounds. Well, we're not able to restrict access to a CRF, so instead we're going to put that CRF in its own DCI book and not even make it accessible through RDC or things like that. So a lot of the improvements in best practices have come through requests, enhancement requests and recommendations from that group, and I think that's, again, another big plug for that group. If things aren't working for you, you can always be part of that group and get your voice heard a little bit longer and higher and stronger. And again, I think sharing of ideas and resources, people have really come up with best practices in terms of, everything has to be faster and faster these days. You want to get those submissions in faster, and the faster you can do things, the better you can do things. Again, I think standards are always huge. Training is always huge. I hope that answers the question.
Great, thank you. What is the medium time frame for a data manager to be able to use OC, considering that the person already has experience with other EDC systems?
Oh, wow. OC is one of those things you don't learn it in a week. When I teach our OC basics class, for example, it's a 5-day training class. I walk in the very first day. The first thing I say is, if you think you're going to walk out of here on Friday and you're going to know OC, you're mistaken. It is a huge system. There's a lot to know, a lot to learn. A lot depends, too, on how you do the training, because some people, I think, you're not going to learn everything soup to nuts. If your job is strictly data management and the only pieces of OC you really care about knowing are how to do, data entry and discrepancy management and DCFs, things like that, you can cover those things. But you also have to have kind of an overview of the rest of the system and how things fit together. OC itself is not just an EDC system. RDC is the EDC component of OC. All of the setup and everything happens through OC, and then the RDC is just the interface by which your site personnel can access and enter data and manage discrepancies and everything. So a lot too depends on, are your data managers going to be doing their discrepancy management tasks through the RDC interface or through OC. Even if they're going to do the bulk of it through RDC, I really think it's very critical that they know the OC side of things, because there's certain things that they can't do through the RDC interface. They can't go in and lock a CRF, for example. So It's a long and ongoing. I'm not going to say you got to be in training for 6 months before you let them loose on their first study, but it's a pretty intense system. So I think they can be up and running on the RDC interface fairly quickly, just like the site users, but they have to, of course, have more information about it than your typical site users would have.
Great, thank you very much. So it looks like we have used up the allotted time we had for this webinar. I realize we have many more questions now, but unfortunately we just don't have the time to get to all of them. If you have additional questions, please do not hesitate to contact us. Our US and EMEA phone numbers are on this slide. You can also email our info@biopharm address, or you can also contact vgreen@biopharm.com. Vicki Green handles our OC-RDC clients. She herself is very familiar with the systems. So feel free to reach out to Vicki or just give us a call at one of the numbers. Once again, please note that today's webinar will be available on biopharm.com within 24 hours for you to review and to share with your colleagues. We thank you for your participation and hope that the information Lori provided you today was helpful. So thank you once again, and have a wonderful day or evening.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.